dawn comes softly to the coast of southern France. The Mediterranean is calm. Too calm. Small waves brush against empty beaches that have not seen an enemy landing since the war began. There are no burning cities here, no shattered harbors, no dramatic headlines waiting offshore. And yet, on the morning of 15th of August 1944, this quiet coastline is about to change the course of the war in Western Europe. Far out at sea, Allied ships hold position in disciplined silence. Troop carriers, destroyers, landing craft. Above them, aircraft trace steady paths through the early light, unseen from the ground below. This is not Normandy. There are no towering cliffs, no fortified Atlantic wall looming over the sand. That is precisely why this place matters. For months, the war in Europe has revolved around northern France. The world's attention is fixed on Normandy, on hedgerows and beachheads and brutal advances measured in yards. But behind that struggle lies a different problem, one less visible, yet just as decisive. Supply. Men, fuel, ammunition, food, vehicles. An army does not move without them. And by the summer of 1944, the Allied advance from Normandy is outrunning its lifelines. Ports are damaged, roads are clogged. Every mile forward strains the system holding the offensive together. Southern France offers an answer. Its ports remain largely intact. Its terrain opens naturally toward the Rhône Valley, a corridor leading straight into the heart of the continent. And the German forces defending it are stretched thin, isolated, and increasingly uncertain of their orders. Operation Dragoon is not designed to steal headlines. It is designed to open doors. Within hours, Allied troops will be ashore. Airborne forces will be landing inland. German commanders will be forced to choose between holding ground they cannot defend or retreating before they are cut off. What follows will not be a single dramatic clash, but a rapid unraveling. A campaign that moves faster than expected, breaks assumptions rather than walls, and quietly turns southern France from a battlefield into a highway. The road to southern France begins far from its beaches. By early 1944, the Second World War has entered a decisive phase. On the Eastern Front, the Red Army is advancing relentlessly westward, bleeding the German army at a scale unmatched anywhere else in the conflict. In Italy, Allied forces are locked in a slow, punishing campaign against prepared German defenses that refuse to break quickly. And across the English Channel, preparations are underway for the largest amphibious assault in history. Everywhere, pressure is building. The Allied strategy is clear in principle: force Germany to fight on multiple fronts simultaneously, stretch its reserves, and deny it the ability to stabilize any single line. But turning that strategy into reality requires more than courage or numbers. It requires movement, and movement requires supply. When Allied forces land in Normandy on 6th of June 1944, they secure a foothold, but not yet a solution. The beaches provide access, not capacity. Artificial harbors help, but they are fragile. Roads are narrow. Railways are destroyed. Ports that could sustain a continental-scale army remain either heavily damaged or firmly in German hands. As the summer advances, this problem grows sharper. The Allied armies in northern France begin to push forward faster than planners expected. Success creates its own crisis. Fuel shortages slow armored units. Ammunition has to be rationed. Trucks are driven to exhaustion. The front is moving, but the logistics system behind it is strained to the limit. This is where the Mediterranean comes back into focus. For much of the war, Allied planners have argued over priorities. Should resources be concentrated on a direct strike across the Channel, or spread across multiple theaters to weaken Germany everywhere at once? Southern France has long sat at the center of this debate. Earlier proposals for a landing there were postponed, reshaped, or shelved entirely as Normandy took precedence. But by mid-1944, the calculation changes. Southern France is not just another front, it is a logistical opportunity. The ports of Toulon and Marseille are among the largest in the Mediterranean. If captured intact and put back into operation, they could funnel men and material directly into France, bypassing the bottlenecks of the north. Geography amplifies this potential. From the southern coast, natural routes lead north through the Rhône Valley, a wide corridor cutting deep into France and toward Germany itself. An army supplied through the south would not have to fight its way across the same constricted terrain facing Allied forces in Normandy. German defenses in the region also appear vulnerable. The forces responsible for southern France are spread thin, tasked with defending a long coastline with limited resources. Many experienced units have already been pulled north to face the main Allied threat. What remains is a patchwork of formations, some under strength, some poorly equipped, all increasingly aware that the war is turning against them. At the same time, political considerations come into play. Free French forces, rebuilt and reorganized, are eager to return to their homeland in strength. A landing in the south offers them that chance, not symbolically, but as a major operational force contributing directly to liberation. By the summer of 1944, southern France is no longer a secondary idea. It has become a necessary one. And as Allied leaders weigh these realities, logistics, geography, enemy weakness, the decision to return to the Mediterranean coast moves from debate to preparation. By July 1944, the decision is no longer theoretical. Allied planners turn from whether to land in southern France to how fast it can be done. The operation is formally approved under the name Operation Dragoon, and its purpose is defined with unusual clarity: secure the coast, seize the ports, and force German forces in the south to abandon positions they cannot hold. The geography works in the Allies' favor. The southern French coastline offers multiple landing beaches suitable for amphibious assault, without the dense fortifications that define the Atlantic Wall in the north. German planners have always treated this sector as vulnerable, but not decisive. Defenses exist, but they are uneven, thinly manned, and short of modern equipment. The German forces responsible for the region, commonly grouped under Army Group G, are in a difficult position even before the first Allied soldier lands. They are stretched across a wide area, tasked with guarding ports, coastal approaches, and internal lines of communication. Many of their strongest units have already been pulled north to counter the Allied breakout from Normandy. What remains is a force capable of resistance, but not sustained defense against a full-scale invasion supported by overwhelming air and naval power. Compounding the problem is uncertainty. German High Command understands that another Allied landing is possible, but timing and location remain unclear. Normandy has absorbed attention and resources. Italy continues to demand reinforcements. The southern coast sits in between, important, but perpetually under-prioritized. On the Allied side, planning accelerates. The U.S. 7th Army is designated as the primary American ground force, while French Army B, formed from Free French units and colonial troops, prepares to land alongside it. Naval forces assemble in the Mediterranean, where Allied sea control is already well established. Air power, operating from bases in Italy and Corsica, is positioned to dominate the skies over southern France. An airborne component is added to the plan, but with a specific, limited purpose. Rather than a massive drop intended to seize wide areas, airborne troops are tasked with disrupting German movement inland, securing key roads, delaying reinforcements, and deepening confusion during the critical first hours. Their role is to unbalance the defense, not replace the main landing force. Political considerations reinforce the urgency. For the Free French leadership, Dragoon represents more than a military operation. It is a return in force, under their own banners, to liberate French territory. French units are not auxiliary participants. They are central to the campaign's legitimacy and momentum. By early August 1944, the final pieces fall into place. Naval bombardment plans are fixed, air schedules are synchronized, beach sectors are assigned. German responses are anticipated, then discounted, based on the simple reality of force imbalance. If the landing succeeds, German commanders in the south will face an impossible choice: defend static positions and risk encirclement, or retreat rapidly to avoid destruction. The logic of Dragoon is not subtle. It does not seek a dramatic breakthrough through brute force. It aims to make the German position in southern France untenable from the moment Allied troops come ashore. As assault forces load into transports and airborne units prepare for night departure, the campaign's true character becomes clear. This will not be a battle to hold ground. It will be a battle to remove it. The success of Operation Dragoon depends less on courage than on coordination. By August 1944, the Allies have learned hard lessons from earlier amphibious assaults. Normandy proved that overwhelming force alone does not guarantee speed. What matters is synchronization: land, sea, and air moving as one, with no single element outrunning the others. In southern France, that coordination is sharper, cleaner, and more flexible. Naval planners exploit a key advantage: control of the Mediterranean. Unlike the English Channel, where German coastal artillery and naval threats remain constant, the waters off Provence are dominated almost entirely by Allied fleets. Battleships, cruisers, and destroyers are positioned not just to protect the landing force, but to actively shape the battlefield inland. Naval gunfire is no longer just preparatory, it is responsive. Forward observers, airborne units, and advancing troops can call for fire against retreating German columns, crossroads, and strongpoints. The sea becomes a mobile artillery platform, extending Allied reach far beyond the beaches. Air power reinforces this dominance. By the summer of 1944, the Luftwaffe in southern France is a shadow of its former self. Allied aircraft operate with near-constant freedom, striking rail lines, bridges, and road networks days before the landing. German movement is disrupted not by a single blow, but by sustained pressure that erodes response time and cohesion. This aerial isolation is deliberate. The goal is not to destroy every unit in place, but to prevent German forces from reacting in an organized way once the invasion begins. Delays matter more than destruction. Every hour gained inland reduces the chance of a coordinated defense. The airborne element fits into this logic. In the early hours of 15th August, a U.S.-led airborne task force with Allied participation drops inland from the coast. Their objectives are narrow but critical: seize key road junctions, block likely German reinforcement routes, and create uncertainty about the scale and direction of the invasion. They are not asked to hold large areas, they are asked to complicate everything. This approach reflects a shift in Allied doctrine. Rather than relying on airborne troops to carry the weight of an operation, Dragoon uses them as accelerants, forcing German commanders to respond to multiple threats simultaneously, with incomplete information. On the ground, The amphibious assault is planned with similar restraint. Landing beaches are chosen for accessibility and momentum rather than symbolism. Resistance is expected, but not fanatic. German coastal units are under strength and unevenly trained. Many positions are bypassed rather than crushed, allowing Allied forces to push inland quickly instead of becoming fixed on the shoreline. This emphasis on movement is intentional. The Allied objective is not simply to land successfully, but to break the enemy's ability to stabilize. Speed denies the defender time to improvise. Every kilometer gained in the first days multiplies the pressure on German command decisions. Technology supports this tempo. Improved landing craft, better communications, and refined logistics planning reduce friction at every stage. Supplies flow ashore with fewer delays. Units reorganize faster. Commanders have clearer situational awareness than in earlier campaigns. None of this removes danger. German artillery still fires. Mines still explode. Individual units resist fiercely in places. But the overall balance is unmistakable. The Allies are not fighting for survival on the beaches. They are already thinking about the next phase inland. And that mindset, confidence rooted in preparation, creates its own momentum. As troops push beyond the shoreline and airborne forces hold their positions inland, German commanders begin to see the problem forming. Their defenses are not being smashed head-on. They are being rendered irrelevant by speed, firepower, and control of space. The technical and tactical pieces are now in motion. What remains is the human response, how soldiers, civilians, and commanders react when a front begins to dissolve faster than doctrine can explain. The landing does not unfold in a vacuum. As Allied forces move inland, they enter a region shaped as much by occupation as by terrain. Southern France has lived under German control for nearly 4 years. For civilians, the sound of aircraft and naval guns on the morning of 15th of August is not abstract. It is unmistakable. Liberation is no longer a rumor carried by distant broadcasts. It is arriving in real time. In towns and villages across Provence, reactions are cautious at first. People watch from doorways and windows. Some hide. Some prepare food and water without being asked. The memory of reprisals is still fresh. German units have not yet disappeared, and collaboration and resistance have coexisted uneasily throughout the occupation. But as Allied columns advance and German troops begin pulling back, hesitation gives way to movement. The French resistance, long fragmented and forced into secrecy, becomes visible. Guides step forward. Roads are marked. Information flows outward about German positions, blocked routes, abandoned depots. Coordination is imperfect, sometimes chaotic, but the effect is immediate. German units already short on transport and fuel now face an environment that actively works against them. For Free French forces, the moment carries a different weight. French Army B lands not as an auxiliary force, but as a central component of the operation. Its soldiers come from varied backgrounds: metropolitan French units, North African formations, colonial troops, many of whom have not set foot on French soil since 1940. The return is emotional, but the mission leaves little room for reflection. There is ground to take, ports to secure, a war still to be fought. Politically, their presence matters. The liberation of southern France by French forces under French command reinforces legitimacy at a critical moment. As Paris prepares for liberation from the north, Dragoon ensures that France is not merely freed by outsiders, but reclaims itself in the south. This dual advance, Normandy in the north, Provence in the south, compresses German control and reshapes the political landscape of post-war France. On the German side, morale fractures unevenly. Some units fight stubbornly, holding villages or delaying advances where terrain allows. Others withdraw rapidly, prioritizing survival over doctrine. Orders from higher command emphasize avoiding encirclement rather than holding territory at all costs. The logic is clear. Southern France cannot be held without reinforcements that no longer exist. The problem is execution. Retreat requires coordination. Coordination requires time. And time is exactly what Dragoon denies. Allied air power hammers road networks. Naval gunfire reaches far inland along the coast. Resistance activity turns rear areas into hazards. What should be an orderly withdrawal becomes fragmented and reactive. German commanders face a narrowing set of choices: hold and risk destruction, withdraw and risk collapse, delay and hope the front stabilizes somewhere farther north. None of these options offer recovery. They only shape how much of Army Group G survives the retreat. Civilians experience the shift almost physically. German checkpoints vanish. Columns pass through towns without stopping. Equipment is abandoned. For many, the speed of change is disorienting. Liberation does not arrive as a single moment, but as a sequence. First confusion, then absence, then Allied presence. The psychological effect is cumulative. The occupation does not end with a dramatic battle in most places. It dissolves. And that dissolution undermines German authority more effectively than any declaration. For the Allies, this human momentum reinforces operational momentum. Each town secured without prolonged fighting frees units to move faster. Each intact bridge accelerates advance. Each cooperative civilian reduces friction. Dragoon begins to generate its own forward pull, one that planning alone could not guarantee. By the end of the first days, it is clear that this is no longer simply a successful landing. The southern front is unraveling. What remains is the decisive phase, where German withdrawal turns into strategic collapse, and the invasion of southern France transforms from an operation into a breakthrough. The decisive moment begins not with resistance, but with absence. On the morning of 15th of August 1944, Allied commanders quickly realized that the German response is weaker and slower than expected. Coastal defenses fire sporadically. Some strongpoints resist briefly. Others are bypassed entirely. Within hours, the beaches are no longer the focus. The battlefield has already shifted inland. This is the moment Dragoon was designed for. Assault waves push beyond the sand almost immediately. Infantry moves inland, while engineers clear routes instead of digging in. Armor follows sooner than planners once thought possible. The emphasis is not on holding ground, but on exploiting speed before the German command can reassert control. Airborne units inland begin reporting success. Key road junctions are held. German columns attempting to move toward the coast are delayed or diverted. Confusion spreads faster than orders. In several areas, German officers are forced to make decisions without reliable information about the scale of the landing or the direction of Allied advance. Naval gunfire extends the pressure. Allied warships engage targets well beyond the shoreline, striking retreat routes, coastal roads, and known assembly areas. German units attempting to regroup near the coast find themselves exposed to fire from the sea and the air simultaneously. Movement during daylight becomes increasingly dangerous. By the afternoon, the pattern is clear. This is not a battle for beaches. It is a race inland. German commanders begin issuing withdrawal orders, not because they have been defeated in place, but because holding position risks encirclement. The Rhône Valley looms as both escape route and trap. If Allied forces reach it quickly enough, Army Group G could be split, isolated, or destroyed in fragments. Resistance becomes uneven. Some German units delay skillfully, using terrain to slow Allied columns. Others disengage almost immediately, abandoning heavy equipment to preserve manpower. The cohesion that doctrine demands cannot be maintained under this pressure. Every delay buys time, but also exposes units to destruction from the air. The liberation of coastal towns accelerates the collapse. Ports and road hubs fall with minimal fighting. Civilians emerge in growing numbers. Resistance groups become bolder. German rear areas lose their sense of control. Orders issued in the morning are obsolete by evening. By nightfall on the first day, the shape of the campaign has changed. The landing has succeeded beyond its immediate objectives. The German defensive line in southern France no longer exists as a coherent front. What remains is a series of withdrawals, delaying actions, and improvised decisions made under constant pressure. Dragoon has passed its point of no return. From this moment on, the question is no longer whether the Allies can hold southern France. It is whether German forces can escape it at all. The withdrawal begins as an attempt at control. German headquarters issues orders for a phased retreat northward, aimed at preserving what remains of Army Group G. The objective is clear: avoid encirclement, fall back through the Rhône Valley, and establish a new defensive line farther north, where terrain and shorter supply lines might slow the Allied advance. In reality, that plan begins to unravel almost immediately. Allied forces move faster than German staff officers believe possible. Roads that should have been choked with resistance are already open. Bridges expected to be destroyed are captured intact. Air power dominates daylight movement, forcing German columns to disperse, hide, or move only at night, slowing them further. The Rhône Valley becomes a funnel. What was meant to be an organized corridor of retreat turns into a bottleneck. Units converge from different directions, often without coordination. Vehicles break down. Fuel runs short. Artillery is abandoned to keep columns moving. Commanders lose contact with subordinate units and are forced to improvise. Allied pressure never relents. American and French ground forces push north relentlessly, leapfrogging resistance rather than grinding through it. Airstrikes hit road junctions and rail lines ahead of retreating columns. Naval gunfire continues to reach inland targets near the coast, denying German forces any safe staging areas. The liberation of Toulon and Marseille accelerates the collapse. German garrisons attempt to delay the inevitable, but they are isolated and undersupplied. Fighting is sharp in places, but short-lived. Within days, both ports fall into Allied hands. The German southern flank is now fully exposed, and the retreat turns increasingly chaotic. Morale breaks unevenly. Some German units maintain discipline and withdraw in good order, conducting skillful rearguard actions. Others dissolve under pressure, fragmenting into smaller groups that seek only to escape. Orders from higher command arrive late or not at all. The sense of operating as part of a coherent front disappears. For Allied commanders, the picture becomes unmistakable. This is no longer an invasion fighting for survival. It is an exploitation phase on a strategic scale. French Army B advances with momentum, reclaiming cities and towns at a pace unseen since 1940. U.S. 7th Army units link advances across multiple axes, tightening the pressure on retreating forces. Within weeks, the results are clear. Southern France is effectively lost to Germany. Army Group G survives only by abandoning vast quantities of equipment and territory. What had been a defensive theater becomes a corridor for Allied advance, feeding men and material northward into the heart of Europe. Operation Dragoon has done exactly what it was designed to do. It has not decided the war on its own, but it has removed an entire region from German control, accelerated the collapse of the Southern Front, and transformed the Allied strategic position in Western Europe. The invasion phase is over. What follows is the consequence phase, how this sudden shift in geography and logistics reshapes the war beyond the beaches and the valleys. The consequences begin to surface almost immediately, even before the fighting fully subsides. With southern France secured, the Allies gain something they have lacked since the Normandy landings: breathing room. The collapse of German control in the south does not just remove an enemy front, it opens space. Space to move, space to supply, space to plan without constant improvisation. The ports of Toulon and Marseille become central to this shift. Both have suffered damage, but not the systematic destruction seen in many northern ports. German demolition efforts are incomplete. Harbor facilities are scarred, but usable. Clearing mines, repairing quays, and restoring basic operations begin at once. The work is methodical, unglamorous, and decisive. What matters is not speed alone, but reliability. As supplies begin flowing through the southern ports sooner than many planners had feared, the pressure on northern supply routes eases. The Allied logistical system gains flexibility. Men and materiel no longer have to funnel through a narrow set of overburdened channels in the north. The war effort becomes less fragile. This shift changes operational thinking. Allied commanders are no longer forced to choose between advancing and sustaining. They can begin doing both. Units arriving through southern France move northward along established routes, feeding directly into the broader campaign against Germany. The Rhône Valley becomes a conduit, not a contested frontier. For German forces, the implications are grim. The loss of southern France removes any chance of stabilizing the Western Front from below. Reinforcements cannot be repositioned easily. Retreating units from Army Group G are absorbed into an already strained defensive system farther north, bringing exhaustion rather than strength. Psychologically, the effect compounds earlier blows. The idea that territory can be lost faster than it can be defended takes hold. German command now faces simultaneous pressure from multiple directions, with fewer resources and diminishing confidence that any line can be held for long. Operation Dragoon has not delivered a dramatic battlefield annihilation. What it has delivered is momentum, quiet, sustained, and structural. A transformation of the Allied position that will continue shaping decisions long after the beaches of southern France fade from memory. And as that momentum builds, a different question begins to surface. Why did an operation with consequences this large remain so overshadowed in the story of the war? The answer lies not in its results, but in its timing. Operation Dragoon unfolds in the shadow of Normandy. By August 1944, the world's attention is fixed on the struggle in northern France, on Paris, on the breakout from the hedgerows, on the race toward Germany's borders. Those battles are visible, dramatic, and politically symbolic. Southern France, by comparison, feels distant and already decided. Even within Allied leadership, Dragoon has never been universally embraced. Some commanders had opposed it earlier, arguing that resources would be better concentrated in the north or redirected to Italy. those debates do not vanish once the landing succeeds. In post-war narratives, victories often reflect pre-war arguments as much as battlefield outcomes. Normandy fits the story of decisive confrontation. Dragoon fits the story of enablement, and enablement is easier to overlook. There is also the nature of the fighting itself. Dragoon works precisely because it avoids prolonged, headline-grabbing battles. German forces withdraw rather than stand and be destroyed. Cities fall quickly. Ports are taken through pressure rather than spectacle. The campaign is defined by movement and collapse, not by iconic last stands. That makes it harder to mythologize. Yet measured by effect rather than memory, Dragoon reshapes the Western Front. It removes southern France from the war in weeks. It feeds Allied armies at a scale that supports sustained advance. It accelerates the compression of German defenses from multiple directions at once. In that sense, its success almost guarantees its anonymity. Operations that solve problems cleanly rarely demand retelling. They do not linger as tragedies or triumphs. They simply work, and then disappear into the larger flow of events. Dragoon's legacy emerges only with distance, when historians trace supply lines instead of front lines. When they follow tonnage instead of troop counts, the southern landing takes on new weight. It becomes clear that the Allied drive into Germany was not powered by a single invasion, but by a system, and Dragoon was a critical part of that system. The campaign did not decide the war by itself, but it removed obstacles at exactly the moment when speed, flexibility, and sustainment mattered most. It turned geography into advantage and silence into progress. And with that understanding, the story of Dragoon moves naturally toward its final meaning, not as a forgotten landing, but as a reminder of how wars are actually won. The story of Operation Dragoon does not end with surrender ceremonies or dramatic final battles. It ends quietly, in movement. Southern France does not become famous because it does not need to be fought over for long. Once the landing succeeds, the region stops being a battlefield and becomes something more valuable, a pathway. Roads open, ports function, supply flows northward without interruption. War continues, but with fewer constraints. That is Dragoon's meaning. It demonstrates that victory is not always forged in the most violent moments, but in the removal of obstacles that make violence unnecessary. German forces in the south are not crushed in a single catastrophic defeat. They are compelled to leave, faster than they can adapt, until resistance gives way to withdrawal. The operation also reframes how power works in modern war. Amphibious landings, airborne drops, naval gunfire, resistance networks, and logistics all combine into a single effect, greater than any one element. None dominate the story alone. Together, they make control impossible for the defender and momentum inevitable for the attacker. For France, Dragoon carries a deeper resonance. It is liberation achieved not only by arrival, but by participation. French forces land, advance, and reclaim territory alongside their allies. Authority returns not as a promise, but as a presence. The occupation dissolves not through proclamation, but through absence. And for history, Dragoon offers a corrective. Wars are often remembered through their loudest moments. The beaches everyone knows, the battles that define eras. But outcomes are shaped just as often by quieter decisions, by operations designed to sustain rather than shock. Operation Dragoon did not decide the war alone, but it ensured that when the final advances came, they could be supplied, supported, and sustained. It turned southern France into a force multiplier rather than a front line. In doing so, it reminds us that wars are rarely won where the cameras are focused, but where the groundwork is laid and never needs to be fought over again.